Venetica. Okay, I'm just going to come out and say it. Has anyone ever even heard of this game? I wouldn't have, other than Amazon randomly suggesting it as a similar product to something else I had looked at. I don't even know what may have triggered it. I pushed it off for a while, but recently I ended up purchasing it, wanting some review material on another unheard of game. So here we are. And you may want to get comfortable. There's a lot of stuff for me to go over. Venetica is a third-person RPG, where you play the role as Scarlet, a pretty girl that's engaged to a soldier in training named Benedict. They live in a small village on the outskirts of Venice called, and I'm probably going to butcher this, San Pasquale. It might be Pasquale, I don't know. But anyway, there's some sort of festival going on. Things turn upside down fairly quickly, as the village is attacked, and in defending Scarlet, Benedict is murdered, and the town goes up into flames. It doesn't burn down entirely, as Scarlet wakes up the next morning to find her fiancé dead, and the feelings of revenge are burning within her. So she decides to set out to find who's responsible and put them in their place. You might think, how in the world is a girl like Scarlet going to run down a group of assassins? Well, she's not your normal woman. Instead, you find out quickly that she's actually the daughter of Death himself. As such, she gets all sort of necromantic powers that allow her to use abilities from the Twilight World, or Underworld. She doesn't really get to raise the dead or anything, at least not until way later in the game, but she does get to travel between realms to learn her new powers, utilize ravens to both find her way and to attack, and most importantly, utilize the Moonblade, a mythical weapon that allows her to permanently destroy demons that invade the world. With the Moonblade and her newfound powers, she goes to seek out the Undead Archon, a group of cultists that are trying to create a new world order. At least, I think that's what's going on. Without constantly checking a wiki or something, it's very hard to follow the story of the game. In the beginning chapter or two, I got it down fine, but after that, everything started to feel really disjointed. Characters will be suddenly introduced and expect you to know who they are, yet at the same time, you may not actually remember an initial meeting. Leon, Scarlet's half-brother? He comes running up to you, and I think it was chapter 2, yet I don't recall ever meeting him in the opening parts of the game. But he sure acts like you know who he is. Even the villains, who could potentially have some pretty neat backstories to them, just get thrown in for boss battles, and the story of who that villain is never really elaborated on. You meet them, they say that they're bad, and Scarlet must die, and then you're fighting them. It's a shame, really. After a few hours of playing, once you arrive in Venice, you'll be asked to join one of 3 guilds. Each has their own small quest line, but as far as I know, they all end up at the same point. Plus, the guild quests are spread out upon multiple chapters, so they're just there to give you something different to do. Sadly, there are trophies based on each of the guilds, so the Platinum, although ultimately easy to earn, will require a minimum of about 2.5 playthroughs, or 1 whole and 2 halves if you want to go that route. The 3 guilds are the Hooded Wings, Order of the Holy Seal, and the one I chose, the Net of the Mask. Think of them as the Thieves, Fighters, and Mages guilds, respectively. Each one does give you somewhat different training routes to buff up your abilities, so there is that to keep in mind. Again, these guilds could have had some awesome content to help drive the story along, but it just doesn't end up doing that. The Net and Mask does give you some real minor information on the main bad guy, Victor, but it's nothing substantial. I'm not sure what kind of information the Hooded Wings or the Order will give you, but I'll find out in a later playthrough. Because, again, I'm a trophy whore. There's another guild that doesn't allow you to join them, but they'll help you out anyway. The Gondoliers. For some reason, they've taken an interest in Scarlet, and they decide to help her out by essentially being a form of fast travel throughout different segments of the world. Sadly, you can't travel directly from Venice to San Pasquale, making for a lot of lengthy but required backtracking. You get to travel to Africa a bit too, and the Gondoliers won't take you there, so you have to travel to the harbor and take a boat. You might be thinking, well, how does this Twilight World fit into everything? Well, it feels like something just put into the game just to give you a reason to get upgraded powers. Occasionally, you'll run into these angelic statues. You normally will have to magically rebuild them by finding pieces of marble nearby, collecting them all, and then interacting with the statue. Scarlet will be involuntarily transported into this other dimension, where she'll run into her beloved Benedict, and they will always embrace the exact same way each and every freaking time. Benedict will then grant Scarlet an ability from beyond the grave. These abilities are always required to move on in the story. It may be the ability to converse with the dead, or even take items from them that they don't want anymore, because they're holding them into place in this world. It's simple stuff. Once Benedict hands Scarlet the ability, she is evicted from the Twilight World, and she always looks confused. You'd think after the first 3 or 4 times she'd get used to this. Scarlet can also willingly enter the Twilight World temporarily by using a skill known as the Passage. Basically, it just transports your body to that plane, allowing you to quickly sneak by enemies, since they won't be able to see you when you're in the Twilight side of things. Only rarely does the game take advantage of this and throw you an enemy that must be defeated in Twilight, though. The Raging Ghosts are the only enemy that do this, although they will stalk and harm you if you're not using the Passage. Other than this, the only other enemies that force you to use Dimension X are the bosses. I guess a distant third reason to use Twilight World is a combination of the first two. See, early in the game, you have to enter some abandoned forest hut to find a will for 2 annoying characters. After reading it to them, they wish for you to join them on their way to Venice. They die horribly when saving Scarlet from a massive boulder attack, but before they perish, they had shown Scarlet how to unlock chests and doors. The oddball thing about this, though, is that you don't actually get to do any of this until you actually reach Venice, even though there are a minimal amount of locked chests in San Pasquale. But what's the point of showing you how to unlock stuff if you can't use it for a few hours yet? The reasoning the game gives is that when approaching a lock, the 2 brothers appear from beyond the grave and tell you how to unlock it. This is done in a minigame that resembles Simon. They show you a button combination using the 4 face buttons, and you just repeat it. Done. Sadly, going around new areas in Venice and doing nothing but fighting the occasional rogue and unlocking every freaking door gets boring about 2 minutes in. Okay, that's enough about the story and setting. Let's move on to the combat. It's bland to say the least. Most of your encounters are just going to be simply running up to your opponent and timing X to attack in time with the flashes of light you see at Scarlet's hands. If the enemy starts to block or attack, you simply press square to roll out of the way, or enter the passage to sneak around. Defending? It's a pain in the ass, simply because first you need to unlock the stupid ability to defend. And keep in mind that each of the 4 weapon classes have different defensive stances that need to be unlocked separately. So if you unlock the defending stance with the sword, you still won't be able to block with the Moonblade. Oh, and there's only 5 quick use slots, which are each direction on the directional pad and circle. So you have 5 available slots for probably close to 2 or 3 dozen skills. You can't just bring up the menu to use these skills, but you must assign them to a quick use slot and use them that way. Because of this, I rarely use my abilities, other than the skills that let you leech life from your opponent. Some skills are story mandated, such as the one that breaks magical barriers, but you'll use this maybe 2 or 3 times overall. So a lot of these abilities you can assign to a slot as needed, and then revert back once you pass the area where it is required. But then again, when you get down to it, the combat doesn't really need these skills. As I said, the leech life skill is convenient, but there are plenty of healing items laying around everywhere that you can take, for maybe a small reputation hit if someone watches you steal them from their home. Not like reputation means anything, other than a trophy that I somehow missed anyway. But the skills? Why bother when most enemies only take about 4 or 5 well-timed strikes? The skills require a chunk of your MP, and although it replenishes slowly on its own, it's just easier to use basic swings. You might think I'm crazy since there's a surprising amount of skills that can paralyze your opponents for free hits, but if I'm not really struggling with the opponent being mobile, then what's the point? So what happens if you fall during combat? Well, you see those purple segments inside the circle made up of your health and magic? Think of those as your lives. When Scarlet dies, she simply enters the Twilight World to get her bearings, and is revived with half of her health. If she runs out of these segments, then she's dead for good. The thing is that when you do die, she's able to move around a bit, just like she's using her passage skill. So though it's time, you'd have plenty of it to run away and heal up, or just maneuver behind your opponent for a revenge attack. Plus, it's very easy to replace your lost Twilight energy by using the Moonblade to defeat your foes. When slaying any evil creatures with the Moonblade, upon death they'll recharge your Twilight energy meter, and 1 or 2 enemies usually does the job to fill 1 bar. And from what I can tell, clearing a chapter gets you another segment, so at the end of the game I had 6 bars to be able to utilize. Not that I needed that many, but it was nice to know that they were there. Another thing that makes your combat strange is that there is no easy way to switch your targets in those times in which there are multiple enemies attacking you. I had to disengage combat altogether, attempt to focus on the target I had intended to attack, and then try to lock on. Now, there is a trophy that I missed in which someone supposedly gives you training on how to fight multiple targets, but from what I could tell online, it's only given you if you go through the order guild line. Here's my question. Why the hell is it mandatory to get this training a quarter into the game? You don't get to defend right away either. You have to learn how an hour or two into the game. I get it, Scarlet isn't a fighter at the start, but if she's a freaking Death's daughter, can't you just grant her the knowledge to be a combat expert? And you think that the training to fight multiple people would be a mandatory one. Hell, there's an optional quest later in the game where you're taking on 6 guys at a time, and she handled them fine, so why is there a freaking training for it? As for the bosses, they're mostly a joke. The only one that gave me any sort of problem was the very first one. Basically, when you encounter one of the bosses, you fight them in their human form, but when killing them in that, they transport you to the Twilight Zone to fight their undead form. Rod Serling appears to introduce you to the form that the enemy takes. Okay, I'm just kidding, but how cool would that have been? But you do enter the Twilight World and have to take down the creature that your enemy takes. The first one is a Medusa-like serpent, and I struggled with this only because it didn't seem to be taking any damage. I had to look it up, and you seriously have to just run backwards enough so it moves a certain way, and then you close in an attack. What the point of this requirement is, I won't ever understand. The other bosses are complete pushovers. The worst of all is probably Victor, as his undead form is ridiculously easy to defeat, and then you have to fight him again in his human form. Although with this, all I had to do was spam the sword combo and he fell. Major disappointment here. The next problem with the combat? Wait, no. Not just the combat, but really for the entire game. The camera. I thought we were done with the N64 or PlayStation days where the camera is an enemy all in itself. But apparently not. Especially when fighting, the camera tends to get stuck somewhere between a wall or obstacle, so it's not entirely clear on what's going on. I've taken plenty of unnecessary bruises because I couldn't see the enemy that was hiding behind the wall that the camera decided not to show me. The camera also doesn't always follow events. Start talking to a new NPC? It may just show Scarlet or the NPC and not switch between the two. God forbid you'd be allowed to move the camera manually in these kinds of segments. And although not as critical, the camera also tends to look the wrong way when entering a new area. So if there's not a door but instead just an opening to a new zone, you might warp into a cave, only to hit forward and inadvertently back out into the previous area because the game spawns you facing the entrance and the camera doesn't designate this. Add in the fact that there are extremely frequent loading screens, and you're going to get upset quickly. Yeah, you see this icon here? Get used to this, as you'll be seeing it a lot. Combat isn't really the most prevalent thing in Venetica. Sure, you'll be seeing your fair share of it, but most of the time I felt like I was running around aimlessly just completing the most menial side quests ever. Think MMORPG style fetch quests, and that's what you have here. Go find a character and find out why they're not home. Oh, of course, they're in the brothel. Find this item. Go kill a bunch of beast nests, which were just a fancy way of saying, destroy these chimneys with a hammer because I said so. You think that further into the game you get more interesting stuff, since you're already sort of famous? But nope. You're still stuck doing the same jobs for Joe Everyman. The problem with this, yes, I know I'm saying that a lot this review, is that there's no real map screen to take a look at your surroundings. For the most part, the minimap does jack shit. The only time you get a full world map is when you're utilizing the gondoliers to fast travel. And see that legend here, how it says that there's an icon for quests and its objectives? Yeah, ignore that. They don't exist. Seriously, there's a key for the icons here, but they don't look to have been implemented. So what was the point of having this here? The minimap does try to help out slightly by putting objective marker pins on it, but even those are confusing. Why are there 2 points for each objective marker? Why not just have the one? I really don't understand this method. And even better, I have witnessed those objective markers pointing to the wrong frigging spot. What is the point of having a checkpoint showing if it's pointing to the wrong location? The fuck? And this gets a lot better. The speech of the game isn't the best, but it's definitely not the worst. But a lot of times, the game can't make up its mind. The subtitles you get shown don't always match up to what are actually spoken by the NPC. For example, in one quest, I was told by the NPC to visit the Southern Bay, yet the subtitle dialogue shows Northern Bay. Well, which one is it? Thankfully, there's only one bay in the game, so that was easy enough to figure out, but seriously? And what about the Dervish group of enemies? One character called them Dervish, Yet one of the bosses calls him Derwish. As for the speech choices you get to make with Scarlet, it just feels weird because the game shows these speech choices as first person, as if Scarlet is trying to decide what to say in her brain. What's wrong with choices like in other games like, say, Mass Effect, Dragon Age, or hell, even the Elder Scrolls games, where you are shown the exact line that you want to say? And that's even if you want to talk to the characters, because in the background, the non-essential NPCs will go about their day spouting random nonsense. That's a normal thing in RPGs, or really any game that features a bustling town. But would have killed the developers to put in some different lines for each of them, instead of the same freaking thing. If you talk to them, they'll usually say something along the lines of, "Oh, hello," or something of the sort. But when walking around, you typically hear, I don't know. Why this line? What is literally every freaking character spelled it? Hell, in the Skullbreak Tavern, it even sounds like freaking Scarlet says it. And it's the most annoying line in the damn game. In the Night of the Mask headquarters, you get some annoying woman with the most obnoxiously high-pitched voice say it every few fucking seconds.
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know about this fucking game. By now, you're probably seeing that there are quite a few problems with Venetica. I guess you wouldn't be surprised to hear that it gets worse. And by that, I mean the glitches. They aren't quite Sonic 06 bad, but it's almost on the same level. I can't believe I just had to compare this game with Sonic 06. So let's run down a few of them I noticed, shall we? One of the first things I've noticed is that when going down ramps, or especially stairways, Scarlet is sometimes not affected by gravity. I think it's mostly when you're hugging a rail, as she seems to step on it while descending, and then walking straight off of it, because it wasn't meant to be walked on. Granted, normally gravity took back over within a split second, but there were times I had to backtrack to get back in the stairway so I can go down it properly. When I got to Venice, I found out the dialogue audio decided that it wanted to start cutting out on me. Thought it was my TV at first, until I realized that it seemed like it was every other line. Plus, I restarted my TV and this issue persisted. Adding that NPCs were getting stuck on things or stepping in place like old school NES RPGs, and I immediately thought, damn, Venice is screwed up. Then you get to a spot where Scarlet is captured and put on a ship. You're in a dungeon that's as dark as you can possibly make it, and you have to trick the guard to enter your cell. It's pretty obvious that you have to somehow knock out the guard, but how? After struggling a bit, I found a bone to use as a sword. Don't ask, because I don't know. You whack the guard and knock him out and are free to leave the cell. I saved here and loaded to resume later on and found out that the dark cell really shouldn't have been that dark. When I reloaded the game, it was bright and easy to navigate. What the hell? When I got to Africa, things started looking like they were really breaking. After defeating the princess of the local town, this happened. I'm actually really glad I took a picture of this on my phone, as it apparently didn't even record properly, because my recorder crashed, as evidenced by this frame rate dip, I guess, which I didn't have while playing. Then the game's video apparently crashed completely. I wish I had the video for the glitched out text, HUD, and even main menu, but I suppose that's lost now. But so you know, even when quitting the game from the PS3 menu to try to restart it, it crashed my PS3. I didn't make it too far from here to reach another bug. Left the ship when I arrived back in Venice to be attacked by these stone creatures. No biggie, I killed them, saw a little scene, and realized that every time I moved the left analog stick, the camera would rotate uncontrollably. Are you fucking kidding me? So I saved the game, reloaded, and it still kept going. So once again, I had to completely exit the game and relaunch it. At this point, I just wanted to finish the damn thing to be done with it. But no, the game wasn't done screwing with me. The real final bug I found? Well, take a look at it. Need I really put any other effort in making any sort of sense to this? Now, to be fair, I think there used to be a ship here. The one that Scarlet originally took to Africa. But that was burned down by the princess before you defeated her. And I also forgot to mention that the African princess was the only one who isn't killed upon defeat and concedes her loss to you. Now, I can't prove this, but I'm pretty sure some quests glitched on me too. I was supposed to get extra mine workers for San Pasquale, since the starting chapter's assassins kinda killed most of them. I found a bunch of guys in the Skullbreak Tavern, but they kept telling me, we'll leave soon. Well, they never did. How the hell was I supposed to finish the quest? That's not it either. There's another optional quest that you take from a shopkeeper who tells you a tale about pale hearts, chunks of marble from the stone beasts that you can kill, of which there are 8 in the game. I'm about 99.99% sure that I killed them all where I found them, at least according to the guide. But one was missing. Supposedly, I was at the harbor when my game's camera fucked up. Did I miss it due to the glitch? Did it ever spawn? I don't know, and at that point, I knew I would just have to pass by that trophy for another day. Sad panda. After all of that, there's really only one other thing to talk about. The graphics. Just like the vibe I get from the rest of the game, they definitely have that early PS3 vibe to them. It would be excusable, but the game was released in 2009, where the PS3 was released in America in 2007. I'll give them a bit of slack though, because the visuals are one of the strongest points of Venetica. Yeah, much of the city looks pretty bland, and Africa looks like only a half dozen colors were used, but the areas showing water actually look kinda nice. Hell, if you look out from the beach area, it's actually kinda beautiful. The opening town even looks good after it was burned down, and the forest that is located nearby is very convincing, with lots of hills, trees, and narrow pathways. Mushrooms grow in dark areas and can be picked up for health. And that's, I think, my biggest concern about Venetica. It started off so promising. You have a young girl's thirst for revenge, a man who wanted to do the right thing by enlisting in the army to protect the one he loves, and scenic starting town to get the game's atmosphere right. The copper mine that you have to clear out gives a sense of the dungeons of the game. It feels like a solid game from the start, minus maybe the lack of defense options this early on. But the more you play, the more you realize that something just isn't lining up. The locations start getting mundane. The enemies don't mix up anything new. The bosses all feel like the same entity. The bugs get more rampant. And the abilities that give you that, whatever feeling. It's almost like the creators of the game, Deck 13, just stopped caring. Either that, or they just had to rush things through deadlines and they didn't get their vision put on the paper, or disc, properly. I never heard of Deck 13 or the publisher DDP Entertainment. But when I looked up both, I saw Deck 13 also created Blood Knights, which I've played, enjoyed for the most part, and reviewed, Lords of the Fallen, which I own but still haven't played yet, and The Surge, which I also have due to the PS4 Plus free game last month, but also haven't touched yet. From what I've heard from friends, both of those were actually fairly solid games. So what happened here? Was it just too ambitious for them? It's possible, because it looks like their catalogs were mostly point-and-click adventure games for this. I guess we'll never really know, though, which is a shame, because, again, I thought this game had some real potential. So that's Venetica for you. I had to laugh, because when I received this game from the seller on Amazon that I bought it from, I immediately noticed that the slipcover was literally a copy, and someone had done a horrible hack job with scissors to fit it into the generic case. Should this have been a preview of things to come? Who knows, but it was still funny to me. As for the game itself, would I recommend it? It's really hard to say. If you take it at face value and play the game as it is, there are fun times to be had. It's almost one of those so bad it's good games, where you know it's not great, but the bad parts will make you laugh, and you keep playing just to see how bad things really get. I could say that about a lot of bad games like Ride to Hell and Sonic 06, but I still don't think it reaches that level. Those games were bad because of horrible gameplay and game-breaking bugs. Venetica is just plain mediocre. The combat is bland, the story starts off good, but never really picks up, and many of the characters just feel thrown in for plot's sake. If you can find it cheap like I did, you're a fan of obscure RPGs, and don't mind possibly seeing a few rough edges, sure, give this one a go. If you say no to any of the above criteria, you may want to skip on this one. Final score? You know what, let's give it a 6 out of 10. This was a hard one to rate, because I was kind of flipping between a 5 and a 6, but I think a 6 is more appropriate. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.